Alrighty, we want to welcome you guys back to the Make or Break show. We're hanging out with Ben Uyeda today. You are in Boston. Are you in Boston right now?
Right now I'm in Boston and just enjoying, well, the start of fall. It's still able to work a little bit outside, but it's turning fast.
Yeah, what's the temperature right now?
It's like in the 50s.
Okay. Me and my wife went to Boston for the first time last November. And so we're from East Atlanta, and it was starting to get, for us, pretty cold. And so we're walking around and I'm like, I can't do this. This place is really cool, but it's pretty cold. So.
Well, I've been mostly based out of here for a little over 10 years, so just starting to get used to it now.
It takes about 10 years.
Yeah.
That's good. That's real cool. Well, we're excited to have you on and talk. I know you've got a really unique story to the folks that mostly we have on here, especially on the maker side of things. And I was listening, I think, to one of your interviews. I kind of want to start at when you were growing up, and you were talking about building it was like a sword, I think. Was that right? So how did that go, and what was kind of like growing up and making for you?
Well, I grew up in a family of sort of very modest means, so making was often just a way of us getting things that we otherwise couldn't afford. And I think when I was somewhere between 11 or 12, I really wanted to have a sword because, swords are awesome.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because, this was before YouTube or anything like that. So for some reason, I felt like I could make one. But back then, you had to sort of, go to the library and check out a book. But our local library was pretty small. We couldn't really find anything on forging or blacksmithing. So it took a while to kind of find things. So we were kind of just guessing from watching movies and stuff like that. So I really didn't know anything about different types of metal. So I very quickly learned that, aluminum doesn't work. And the guy at the hardware store told me, oh, you got to use steel because it's harder. But I still didn't know anything about carbon content or anything like that. But yeah. I had this rough idea that if you heated up steel, hammered it, and then quenched it, it would make it harder. But I didn't really know any of the sort of science behind it. So then I did find a book that showed how to build your own forge. Okay. And so I built a forge out of cinder blocks and hair dryers and tin pipe, the sort of HVAC pipe, and was able to heat up the steel really hot. Had an old piece of a railroad track to use as an anvil, and just had a bar of steel from Ace Hardware or something like that. Yeah. Totally inappropriate for knife making or sword making.
And how old are you during this?
Probably 11 or 12.
Okay.
And so I was hammering it out and was able to sort of flatten it a little bit, and so that felt like progress. And I had a belt sander, so I knew I could shape it with that. And the patio blew up because there was moisture in the concrete. And I had the forge just set up with just bricks and stuff right on the concrete, and so that expanded. And to this day, there's still a nice little chunk missing out of that my parents' concrete patio.
Oh, that's nuts. That's crazy. So was that just kind of part of your childhood, just always kind of tinkering and building with stuff?
Yeah, and I still for me it came I think the interest started from literature, right? I think reading anything like Little House on the Prairie books to Swiss Family Robinson or Robinson Crusoe, it always seemed to me there was an adventure in sort of making. Yeah. And I always felt a little bit resentful that there wasn't such a clear imperative in our sort of suburban life. There seemed something. And I think at that age too, when you're kind of struggling with what are sort of the greater reasons why we should study hard and get good grades. I think there was a time when I was sort of envious of a sort of a simpler lifestyle that was sort of removed from sort of esoteric struggle. That it just seemed okay, if your life is got to take care of these animals, got to grow this food, got to do these things. It just seemed so clear and pragmatic, and it seemed like any time you were using ingenuity, there was a really clear use for it. It wasn't just about sort of self-elevation for some other type of approval, or these kind of more intangible rungs of a ladder that you're climbing for some sort of weird business or sort of lifestyle goal. Yeah. It just felt very concrete and tangible. And so I think that, reading books like that, sort of being intrigued by that kind of lifestyle, sort of led me to sort of experiment. And, was quickly realized that there wasn't really a practical use. So I came to that dilemma all the time where it's, okay, the better you get at making stuff, but like you can probably get a better or a more functional version that's mass produced for cheaper. Yeah. So that's where I started, I think, became interested in design, because, well, then I had to find a reason to justify the creation of things in my own mind. And simple sort of functional usage was a difficult goal to have.
Yeah. The design piece, especially especially, I mean, just go through all of your YouTube stuff. It's just, it's incredible. And we'll definitely get into like the simplicity, but the aesthetic is there. And so I know for me, I'm always feel limited by, I need to buy this like a new tool so I can do this, make this thing. And then I see one of your videos pop up and you're like, yeah, man, I had a saw and a drill and I just made this amazing like stool. I'm like, dang it. Like this is really cool.
Yeah. Well, I think I think that's also a result of sort of identity, right? Yeah. If you think of yourself as a maker, you're going to, or a woodworker, you're going to sort of, that's sort of foundational. That's almost, it's for people that are really into it, that'd probably be like one of the first things they describe about themselves. And in that description, they're also thinking of all the other people that they associate with that term, woodworker or maker. And with all those people, they think about the things that they typically do, all these sort of cultural norms to that kind of like identity. And so it's really hard, I think, if you have this strong identity and it's important to you, and you have strong associations with other people that also share that, it's really hard to sort of think outside that. Yeah. And that becomes the box that people are in. Yeah. Whereas for me, my own struggles are more of thinking, are more from sort of self-identifying as a designer for so long with a background in architecture, is the things that I'm sort of self-defeating on and sort of limiting are that, this isn't really that unique or that new or that novel, or it's too novel or it's too gimmicky and things like that. But yeah, we all create those hurdles for us, but the more we're aware of them, the more we can intentionally break them.
Yeah. So I was listening to the Modern Maker podcast, which has been awesome and a blast. And that you guys had the question, like, who would beat someone in a fight? And I don't know if you mentioned it, but when I was doing some background stuff on you, like you did like martial arts, like for real, like you toured around. And so listening to that, I'm like, I would have taken Ben regardless of your limitations. So, cause you started school later, right? Because of that?
Yeah. So, I did karate and jiu-jitsu from a pretty young age. And it was great. It was another one of those things where I was intrigued by the subject matter of it, but constantly kind of annoyed by what I felt like at that time were a lot of kind of dishonest presentations of it. And, in particular, I mean, there was a day before like the UFC and all that stuff where there's this idea that people that knew Kung Fu and karate could actually fight. And then UFC happens and that's quickly sort of dispelled. Yeah. And so I spent a lot of time in more sort of traditional martial arts. I'd always enjoyed the more competitive and sort of sport karate and more kickboxing type activities a little bit more because they felt like a meritocracy. It wasn't just who got in first on this like pyramid scheme of white people with ponytails practicing Eastern mysticism. But so I was interested in the sort of meritocracy of sport as it related to fighting and martial arts, but didn't fully do it all the way. Was really good at the sort of sport karate, which is more of like the medium to a little bit of full contact every once in a while, and was good at it. But there wasn't a lot of money in it. Traveled around, won a lot, but became sort of more disenfranchised when I realized that, for most martial arts, their belt systems are totally don't mean anything. Yeah. And they're about as it's like having like a credential to be like a minister or something online. Yeah. Sure, you can do a wedding now or something like that, but it doesn't really mean that you studied anything in great depth or that you're necessarily good at anything. So it was fun. It was nice to learn how to be good at something, but I think it was one of the first times where it made me very skeptical of sort of just institutional kind of credentials. Like I always made me want to take them out and make sure that they're being tested in some sort of competitive environment that was more of a meritocracy.
Yeah. So going from your background and you went to Cornell, was there ever a point where that wasn't even like on your radar? Like the fact that, because I know you did community college at first, and then it was like, it's like, man, he like went to Cornell and he got his master's and then he was teaching. Like, were you always like, yeah, like you had confidence in your ability? Like I want to go where the best place is. Like, how was that for you?
I think I had confidence in achievements. I was never a person that thought I could do anything. But once I tried it and saw that, I can do it, then I could extrapolate one step beyond it. I was never a person that said, I can be president, I can be an astronaut or something like that, because those would be like 5 to 10 steps away from where I currently was. But I was always someone that thought, that wasn't that hard. I can extrapolate from a previous achievement. And I never thought I was going to go to a really great school. My parents didn't go to college, so I took some classes at City College when I saw that sort of martial arts and various sort of construction and service industry jobs weren't really going to take me anywhere that I wanted to be. And once I took classes at community college, I was like, well, this isn't that hard. I can do this. And then kept taking the steps from there, and took the SATs very late, did well in those, and then from there started really saying, oh wait, I can go to pretty much any school that I want, and then started taking very seriously that process of figuring out exactly which program I wanted. And for me, so basically I took like 2 or 3, like 3 gap years, which for my personality and was fantastic. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone, but coming into a university setting as a 21-year-old freshman who had already been used to living on their own, had lived overseas, had jobs, was self-supporting, it wasn't like I was smarter. Like these 18-year-old kids were so bright and highly competitive, but they were just figuring out how to like get drunk for the first time and like live on their own and deal with like roommates and deal with an unsupervised life, where I was able to be much better at sort of managing my time, so I could take more units per semester, I think, than like the typical 18-year-old, strictly by sort of knowing how to live better.
So did I see, Zero Energy Design, did that start in 2006? Is that right around 2? And you, so you're still in college when that happened, is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that was the other advantage of all those gap years, is that I was sort of thinking ahead. I felt like I was behind because I was around in the same academic year as people that were much younger than me. So it made me start thinking, well, how am I going to make up that time? And I started talking to people that had graduated and been in the field of architecture for a few years, and said, okay, do you have your own firm? And none of them did. And so then I started taking that, a very simple question very seriously, is how do I start my own architecture firm day one when I graduate? I don't want to wait 10 years of working for somebody else before I have my name on something. And so teamed up with some classmates. We had done some design build competitions, particularly the solar decathlon that we did really well in. And we had a lot of experience working with each other there, sort of put together a team of architects, engineers, and MBAs, and started planning on how we were going to start a firm the day we graduated from college.
That's cool. So you graduate, and then do you go straight into your master's, or is that later?
I combined them. So there's an overlap program, right? And that was just more in the interest of economic efficiency and speed. Switching universities and applying one. From a sheer experiential standpoint, I would always say that you should go to 2 different schools, so you experience different cultures and that. But in my particular case, I was able to sort of take a 5-year undergrad program and a 2-year grad program and compress them all into 5 years.
Gotcha.
So it was able to save a lot of money that way.
That's cool. So in 2010, you guys won the Green Building Council's was it Natural Talent Design competition? Yep. Is that right? And I didn't make the connection until just earlier today when I was in New Orleans. Like we were doing some right after Katrina, or I guess a few years after Katrina, and we were in, was it the 9th Ward, 8th Ward? And like we saw those homes. I'm like, oh, these are so cool. And they're talking about they're super sustainable. They're all solar. I'm like, man, whoever made this is Super smart. So you were part of the team behind that. So kind of the question is, why solar and like why sustainability? Why has that kind of always been in your story?
I think, again, speaking, and it's nice we can sort of go full circle here, is that I've always wanted to have that sort of simple, pragmatic need for things, right? And we don't live in a sort of survivalist culture where we have to grow our own food and do all those things. We have to sort of invent purpose in a lot of ways. And I was always looking for sort of a way to sort of focus energy and effort towards something that felt real, didn't feel totally self-promotional, although I certainly have zero problems with sort of self-promoting. But something that I felt like I could objectively believe in, get sort of warm, fuzzy feels about it, but not feel like it was a strictly sort of emotionally indulgent pursuit. And the thing about sustainability is I think there's a lot of kind of, it felt like there was something kind of undeniable about it, which is kind of funny because it is a largely denied thing. But then there's also people denying that the earth is round now too. Yeah. So, yeah, it just felt simple. Like, so regardless of climate change and those kind of things, right? The minute, the minute sort of the main challenge for mankind doesn't become like, how do we protect ourselves from bears and wild animals, or how do we produce enough food to survive, right? Like in developed countries where we've moved past that. In fact, our bigger health problems are more likely having too much food, or, they're more sort of the self-inflicted challenges. So I felt like at first when I was younger, I was disappointed because I had missed out on those simple challenges that were undeniable, right? Yeah. Like, couldn't it just be about how to be a really good farmer so that you can feed your family better, and that's all you need to put your brain towards doing, or how do you build shelter to protect you from wild animals? So in the absence of that sort of clear imperative of how you use your ingenuity to survive and protect those around you, I said, well, why don't I just tackle the thing that had replaced that, where is how do we sort of design mechanisms that actually encourage people to use less resources or use resources more efficiently? How do we design and implement technology that does these things? And in particular, when I was in Cornell, I worked with a lot of engineers, and so we saw a lot of really cool research. And at first I was like, oh, we just, like most students, we were like, oh, we just need to implement, or we just need to do these things. Like, why can't everything be this way? Yeah. And then we kept wondering, like, well, these things have been around for a while. Like, why aren't they actually being done? And that's when I started to realize that sustainability, as much as it's talked about as a technical challenge involving solar panels, fuel cells, and all these things, it's really more the cultural challenge of implementing sustainable technology is far greater than the technological challenge. Yeah. So we started experimenting with a lot of ideas that were relating to, and that's when the first time I also realized it could be a creative endeavor, not just a technical implementation endeavor. So one of the first concepts that we came up with that was really exciting was, you could tell people to put solar on their houses and they'll be like, yeah, that sounds cool. Great. I'm open to it. What does it cost? And they're like, oh, well, and then they'll go sort of, okay, it costs, $20,000. They'll be like, oh, what's the payback on that versus utility bills? And they'll be like, oh, it's like 7 to 10 years or something like that. They're like, that's okay, but it's not rushing out to do it. Yeah, yeah. And then we realized that, well, most people don't pay for their home with a giant suitcase full of cash. They do it with a mortgage. And then we started realizing, oh, wait, it's really not just about designing solar panels and showing them in an architectural rendering on the house what it looks like. It's actually package them into the lifestyle considerations that people think are important. In this case, their monthly cost of ownership, their mortgage, plus their utility bill. And so we started communicating, wait, no. If you're building a new house, it's totally different than retrofitting an old house. If you can convince the bank to extend your construction budget, so you're packaging the solar into the house, then you might only be increasing your mortgage payment by $50 a month, but reducing your utility bill by $75 a month. Yeah, so the payback is really only on the difference in the down payment. And that's why we started saying, no, it's not just about designing an additional technology into your house. It's about designing a better mortgage payment for your housing plus utilities. Yeah. And that was the first time where I thought, oh, no, you have to get creative, not just on the physical part of design, but in even how you communicate it to the end consumer. Because if they don't understand it and they don't see the value in it, you haven't fully done your job as a designer. The difference between, I think people often mistake the difference between a designer and an illustrator. An illustrator just shows what something looks like. A designer has to show, they have to create motivation and show technical implementation. So you have to show how something could exist, but also provide the motivation so that people would want to spend money, time, and resources to make that thing exist.
Yeah. So that desire to go from this like big overarching problem to you got to reframe it into like an individual person's experience and how they approach it. Is that kind of what drew you towards HomeMade Modern? And because I mean, you're going directly one-on-one once you went to YouTube. Kind of how did that transition? I mean, it seems like you had it made, right? But then you made that transition.
We all have it made, really. Like the fact that part of our even what we're doing right now, the fact that like part of our work life or our sort of like business networking is sort of like talking about things that we're passionate about and doing that. That's all having it made. So I don't know. I've always felt sort of equally happy when I felt reasonably utilized and had clear things that I wanted to do. I felt like things weren't made when I had a lot of sort of indecisive moments about what should I do next. So all I really care is that there's an imperative and an outline of where I can expend my energy and thoughts. So I think as long as I have that, whether it's making terrible swords in the backyard or making YouTube videos now, I'm pretty satisfied with how it's made. But to your point or question, I think there is a through line. In this case, it was, again, trying to look at more the cultural challenge of design rather than just that. And what I saw, both amongst my peers that went to design schools for either architecture or fashion or industrial design, and what I saw in architecture is that the most talented people start to focus more at the higher end of the market. And I was always really intrigued by tech firms. Like I always loved the fact that a company like Google makes Gmail, right?
Yeah.
Gmail is a fantastic product. I know people worth hundreds of millions of dollars that use Gmail, and I know people worth tens of dollars that use Gmail.
Yeah, yeah.
And they both love it, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that was so aspirational, right? That like it didn't have to be this higher low end. That you could figure out a way to serve all, a broad spectrum of people, and at the same time make a lot of money, right? And that was the part I became sort of dissatisfied with architecture over time, is that you're so incentivized to keep doing if you're working with like custom houses like we kept getting higher end clients, and that's awesome, but it doesn't really feel that noble. And even if we started moving towards doing like big housing projects and stuff like that, we'd still only be doing housing for like maybe 500 people a year. And so the internet has always had that sort of intrigue to me, because it was a way to figure out how can I arrange things where just like my ideas as a designer are going to the most amount of people with the least amount of barriers in between them, with the least amount of sort of watering down and sort of in that sort of distribution process. And that's really, it was that sort of dissatisfaction with the business models of architecture that sort of led me to experiment with distributing design media online.
At what point because you made I saw your first posted video, at least on your current channel, was like June 2013. Like at what point were you like, all right, I'm going full out, like this is the thing I'm gonna do? Or has it always kind of been an experiment along the way?
It was before I made that first video, I defined what I knew but didn't know, right? So I knew that, or I believed 100% that people would, that more and more people would consume media online and not in traditional sources. So I felt that was a pretty safe and undeniable realization. And that almost any rational person would agree with that was the general trend. I knew with less certainty, maybe like 90-degree certainty, that more and more people would consume video content over sort of written content. So I believed in those two concepts. And I knew I also believed to even a slightly lesser degree, but still with a high amount of certainty, that I would be pretty good at coming up with creative ideas for video content. So I was committing to those ideas. I wasn't committing to, oh, I can make a job on YouTube. Oh, I can do this. Because I think that's too specific. Because you don't know if YouTube's going to be around forever. You don't know if MySpace is going to go away. So I think for me, it was more looking at the broad general trends of the way media was going, picking the things that I knew were undeniable and safe, and then planning a way to be really good at those things. So the path was never YouTube. I still didn't really focus on YouTube until much later. The path was on those sort of simple things: producing content for online distribution, focus it with an emphasis on video, and a belief that a consistent supply of creative ideas could lead to good results in those endeavors.
Yeah. Why furniture to start out, or the smaller projects? Was it just the accessibility that people would have to this?
Yeah, and my a previous tech company I did had distributed whole architectural designs online, and so I had done that. Knew what it took to get whole architectural plans to people.
Was that Free Green? Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
freegreen.com. So that was a company that we built up and then sold, and I was interested in this sort of what I was thinking. The actual name of the company isn't HomeMade Modern. It's called Lowest Common Design, and I was trying to think of that way is in sort of figuring out what I want to do next. How do I start just at the bare bones bottom? How do I take the most elemental thing? And for me, I call it the lowest common design, which to me, the best example of that is, have you ever been to someone's house and they have like their TV and it's just set on a board that's on 2 cinder blocks?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That was me way back in the day.
Right. So that's a design that you'll see all over the world.
Yeah.
You'll see that in Alabama, you'll see that in Northern California, you'll see that in Mexico, you'll see that in Thailand, you'll see that in China, right? Like some sort of thing where it's like a board across 2 masonry units. So to me, that's like the lowest, most common design thing. It's not authored, it just exists as a general tendency because it's there. The same way like fried chicken isn't exactly, is every country that I've been to has some sort of version of fried chicken. It's that sort of lowest, simplest thing that sort of works and that people everywhere sort of do without even thinking of it necessarily that intentionally. And so that's why I sort of started with furniture. I was sort of thinking along those concepts is how do we take that sort of universality and just elevate it like 1 or 2 steps above it. And that was the sort of initial sort of approach to furniture, home improvement, and design stuff.
Gotcha. I'm sure you've gotten this question before. Is there a project that really stands out that you'd point to as your favorite?
I don't know. I mean, the favorite from a personal enjoyment standpoint, it's always what I'm working on next.
Yeah.
But from I think the way I might take it would be as like the projects that have done the most for me. And the first one that actually I would say is the bucket stool, the concrete stool.
Yeah.
That was the first time where it wasn't I don't think it was ever my most viewed video, but it was one where I saw a difference between people implementing something and people watching something.
Oh, cool.
And, how I was really surprised at how many people just started making that project. And what was really encouraging about it is it wasn't just people that needed a stool, because nobody really needs a 3-legged stool. Like, it's not like a super, I can't have people over for dinner tonight because there's no 3-legged stools in our houses, yeah. Right? It's kind of a superfluous project that does have some function, but isn't really like it's not like a sofa or a bed or a dining table. But seeing how excited people were to take time out of their day, and not just people that were really at the low end of the consumer spectrum. One of the first famous people that I saw make it, or semi-famous people, is the musician Toki Monster, who's like a very successful DJ and music producer, and doesn't have a background in making, but had somehow saw the video and decided that she was going to make one. That's and cool. She posted it on Instagram even before, and that was actually when I first sort of downloaded Instagram. I saw a friend said, "Hey, my favorite DJ just posted a picture of the stool you designed." And I got on Instagram just so I could like comment and say thanks. So I think that project was so encouraging. But to see someone like that was a creative person that I really respected, that doesn't need to make anything, that isn't used to making things, that just sort of said like, that looks fun. And to see someone that doesn't have a ton of free time but was still excited about it, that was hugely encouraging and inspiring.
Gotcha. That's cool. I know we're getting close on time. Before we wrap up, the last question I wanted to ask, is there a topic, because I know you can be all over the place just in your interests, which is really neat. Is there something that you're interested in you just don't feel like you get to talk enough about, whether it's like a material or design aspect? Is there just something like, hey, I don't know why people aren't talking about this?
I think there used to be, like before I started doing the podcast with Mike and Chris, is like voiceover is my least enjoyable part of video.
Yeah.
I think the thing though, would be, I don't think I always get enough time, although this is self-inflicted because I hate voiceover, to sort of explain context of the projects. I think too often I just get comfortable sort of throwing out a project and letting people sort of figure it out. But when I see sort of comments, there's generally sort of confusion between sometimes what's DIY versus what's sort of what's instructional versus what's just sort of a demonstration. There would probably be in my interest to sort of take more time to kind of explain those things. And since you asked me the question, like I think people often misunderstand YouTube, is that they think of it so much as a consumer of it. They go, okay, I watch these videos because I like this person for that thing. But they don't always think, well, why is that person producing things? And for me, it's like, I'll post, I just actually uploaded a video right now, and it's probably not a DIY project, it's more of a demonstration. And showed how to use a laser cutter to cut these inlays that go into a concrete table. And it looks awesome. But laser cutters aren't for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I think, half the people will watch it and will be sort of like, this is great, I want to make it, but I can't make it because of this. And that's such a prescriptive approach. Mm-hmm. When really you want to take a conceptual approach. You want to say, the concepts behind the things are universal. Taking a cheap material like concrete, which is, $15 a bag, and making a big, heavy stone type tabletop out of it. And then saying, how can I differentiate it from all the other concrete tables by taking an expensive material like walnut or hardwood and doing a little bit of inlay? That's the concept behind a project. Now, the particular path that I followed involved a laser cutter and all those things, but you don't need a laser cutter to take advantage of that concept. Yeah. And so I'd say the thing I don't get to talk enough about it is what sort of happens in the first year of any good design school, is they teach the students, hey, it's not about style, it's not about prescription, it's not about, hey, houses have, pitched roofs and this many windows and this. It's about thinking about the concepts behind why we need to build stuff in the first place, and then reverse engineering that and deploying those concepts in a flexible way that can specifically take advantage of whatever you have available to you, but not necessarily saying like, follow each step. Oh wait, I don't have laser cutter, can't do it, done, worthless, unsubbed, bye.
Yeah, that's good. I'm reading a book right now. It's cooking. It's like salt, heat, acid, and I forget the last one. I'm not finished, but they're talking about the principles and not hey, the recipe is not the recipe. There's a point for it.
100% is exactly the same, right? If you can only cook by recipe, that's a really limiting thing. You're only as good as like the recipe book or what you know. Yeah. Learn the concepts behind it, and then you can invent and add things to it. And it won't just be trial and error invention. It'll be sort of a much smarter, more efficient version of that.
Gotcha. So HomeMade Modern, is that the best place you'd send people to go to follow your stuff?
Just Google HomeMade Modern, or if you go to Instagram and go to Benjamin, last name Uyeda. Instagram's where I'm the most active, and I'm actually normally pretty good about answering my DMs.
That's good. I mean, I appreciate your time. It was a blast chatting with you. So
likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.